end up going like an hour plus just talking about this random stuff, even though we have no games to talk about.
Let's see how long we can go. Should be a quick one, but you
We'll
never
see what we
know.
can do. We'll see what we can do about that. All right, let me get. There we go. All right, ready?
Yep.
Welcome everyone to Flyover Footy. My name is Matt Baker. I'm joined today with Santiago Beltran for a Flyover Footy special. We don't have a game to talk about. We don't have a game to look forward to, but we're here nonetheless in this Leagues Cup break where we're going to bring to you today some information on the transfer window, which just closed this week. We're going to look at CITY2 for a little bit, and we're going to kind of go deep into the roster. So it feels like it's been, I don't know, 75 days since the last City match. At least to me it does. Santi, how are you doing?
Doing great. Yeah, I think you're right. It's to me it looks like it's been forever, and I missed it. I miss going to the stadium, even going to the training grounds. But
Yeah.
obviously none of that this week. Luckily, I was out of town. I also took advantage of the break to take a break myself. So I didn't miss it as much. But now that I'm back, I'm like, oh, I wish I had a training to go to or that there was something to talk about. But hey, we're here and the transfer window is over, so we can talk about that.
Yeah, kind of perfect timing because it does feel like I don't know, we're just drifting through this week. I don't have my soccer stronghold to hold on to, keep me grounded and separate the days out. So everything just kind of feels a little bizarre. We're recording this on a Friday. The week has just kind of meandered on. We're watching other teams play in Leagues Cup. We're watching different storylines throughout the league, different circumstances, different discussions. But for us, it's looking at the action in the transfer window. And while it's not the sexiest thing that's happened in the league, and I think there have been other bigger stories by far, there were some meaningful moves made in this window by City. They made 3 moves. So let's dive into them, Santi. We started off with Nukvi Torison signing, and he's the biggest splash I think that we made. That's easy to say. We also signed Anthony Markanic from Colorado Rapids, and we acquired $100,000 in GAM for an unused international roster slot. Wow, what a big splash these make. But no, in all fairness, let's talk about Torison because this is the name that had been rumored for a while. It was the first name that we were made official a couple weeks ago, and I think this was made official before our Leagues Cup match. So this one we've
Yeah.
had some time to ruminate on, and he's probably the of all the names, the most household of the names now that people have been paying attention to. So Nuke Vitorison is 6'2", 23 years old, about to turn 24 later this month. He was signed to a contract through 2025 with an option for 26. He's a one-time Icelandic national team player. Hopefully more to come on that. Torison has scored 8 goals and had 3 assists in 30 games across all competitions for Beerschot in the Belgian league. Had 17 goals and 5 assists scored in the Icelandic First Division for his former team, KA Akureyri, in 2022. He's been described as fast, dynamic, and Lutz has been quoted. This is a very interesting point because there have been a lot of discussions about his positioning and how he's going to help out City, what his role will be. Lutz was quoted saying he's seen as a left winger. He's not a left winger. He's an offensive all-arounder. When it comes to our playing philosophy, our values, our playing style, that's a guy that basically hits all the things we're looking for. When the opportunity came up that we might be able to get him out from Beerschot, it was worth the lengthy process of negotiations, and finally, the curtain fell. That flexibility and versatility to play every position up front made it a very easy no-brainer for us. So, Santi, thoughts on Torison?
Definitely the versatility. It's a great thing when you get a player like him. You can use him in different roles, and yeah, even though he is being said that he's a left winger, he'll be able to play in different positions. And I go back to a few shows ago, probably months ago, weeks ago, when we were talking about what were the biggest needs going into the window. I think most of us talk about getting a striker. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
he's not a natural striker, but he can play in that role if needed. And back then, when we talk about that, like Sam Adeniran wasn't back yet. Now he's back, and he has proven that he can play that role, and it just gives the team more weapons offensively. Just thinking about the left wing, I know he can play other positions, but it will be congested at left wing. There will be a lot of options there.
Yeah, and that kind of makes me think of when we see highlights of Torreson and we see how he plays in some of those videos, it kind of seems like he finds himself high up on the field, not unlike Sam Adeniran on the left side. So I hear left winger, I hear Lutz describe him as an offensive all arounder. I don't think of a midfielder. I almost think of the kind of player that Rasmus Alm is, but on the other side. And the way that we've seen that play out for City so far this year, Alm has not fallen back into the midfield role. He only plays a midfield role when we're in a 4-2-3-1. And even then, he's more high up on the field alongside Nico Gioacchini or Sam Adeniran. And so when we do like this 4-4-2 with the diamond, Alm is not part of the midfield in that. He's one of the two
Right,
up front. That's kind of the role that I'm envisioning for Torreson. I don't know about starting, especially not right away. I think when it comes
right,
to and that's probably good to remember when it comes to expectations. The biggest question mark here, at least right off the bat, is when will he make his appearance with City? When will he start training? And how fast will that paperwork be completed for his arrival? I think back to Jabulu Blom on using that as a framework for what we can expect. Blom was signed in December of last year. It took him about a month to arrive to St. Louis after his signing due to work permits and visas. He started training camp, and then 2 months later, he was ready to go, but still not at that full 90. So if Torreson is signed here in July, he comes to St. Louis in, let's say, mid August, I think early to mid September is a fair, if not ambitious, timeline to expect him to be seeing minutes. So against Austin, don't I urge everyone, don't be over anxious in seeing him against Austin, especially on August 20th. I hope to see him training with the team by that time, not necessarily even consideration for matches. I think it'll be a few more weeks before we see him, especially too, because his last game minutes were in May. And so he is in that same boat that a lot of City 2 players last year, also the Berkeys, the Klauses, the Leuvens, were when they got up to speed with City 2. And it wasn't in July. It wasn't in early August. It was a little bit down the line and for that stretch run for us last year. Think of those two scenarios when it comes to setting your expectations, I think.
do you think he will see some minutes with CITY2 as part of getting in shape and getting acclimated to the system?
I guess depending on the form of everyone involved, that could be, because we've seen that propensity for Carnell to ride the hot hands and ride who's in form. And if he has a cohesive unit and we're winning, I don't see him introducing Torreson into the mix too hastily. I think that would provide a buffer to get him some meaningful minutes and matches under his belt without disrupting what the first team might have going. Now, if we fall into a huge slump and we go over in the first few weeks we play, there could be a little more urgency. There could be a little more willingness to slot him in and just throw him to the wolves, so to speak. But I think the way that the form will go for City will kind of dictate that. I wouldn't be surprised because it's a viable option. We see it for Nielsen right now. Hopefully, we're going to see it for Klaus in the next few weeks. We saw it for everybody last year. It's there, and it's something that Carnell and Lutz and group have taken full advantage of when they've needed to.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if his first few minutes are with CITY2, and then they can ramp up his minutes with City. But yeah, hopefully that is a scenario where the team goes in a slump. It's just something that we discussed today, and the team will start. We have a great start on August 20th against Austin.
Agreed. So that was the big splash of the signing of the transfer window, right? Would you agree that that was kind of the marquee name?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And just thinking back about the beginning of the season when we knew, okay, there are some roster slots still available. What is the team going to do with them? And I remember talking a little bit about it and saying, well, the team is probably going to take that approach of about seeing how the season goes and from there determine what its needs are. And when you find yourself in first place, yeah, there are always needs, there are always positions that can be improved, but you can take your time and not rush into these decisions. And Lutz himself said it when he had his availability before the transfer window started,
Mhm.
he was like, we don't want to bring a player that will make a difference just 3 months. We want to bring somebody for the long term. And this acquisition shows that there is a plan. And the fact he signed until 2025 with that option for 2026 shows that there is a long term plan. And we may not see a lot from him this year, but I expect to see him more next year if he doesn't play a lot this year.
So Torreson comes to us from outside of MLS, from Beershot. So he had to structure a brand new contract. The other move that was made for a player this window was for Anthony Marcanic, coming to us from Colorado. The quote that you said, Santi, is very important to me with this signing because I think Torreson, we can all see that there is that long term plan with his age, with his national team experience, with what he can provide us in the attacking end. With Marcanic, the quote that I had is from Lutz. It's not just something that comes in now and does the trick for a few weeks with regards to who they're looking to sign.
Hmm.
It needs to be something that gives us a sustainable push for the future. That's where we're definitely looking at a few more areas where we can strengthen our club. That's what he said after the Torreson signing. Enter this week, a day before the transfer window closed on Wednesday. On August 1st, it was announced that the 6'1", 23-year-old left back, Anthony Marcanic, was acquired from the Colorado Rapids. Marcanic was originally drafted as the 26th overall first round super draft pick in 2022, where he was signed to a 1-year contract with 2 option years. The first option year was picked up by the Rapids. And looking at his salary on MLS Players Association, his salary would fill in with that supplemental minimum, just like a Max Schneider. With this signing, it pushes, and we'll talk about the roster in a minute, but this signing pushes us to the max of our roster availability. This is the 31st contracted City player, filling a spot that Max Schneider has left since he's on loan with CITY2. So we are now at full capacity. That's the most important thing here. We didn't sell anybody. We didn't transfer anybody out. The rumored transfer out of Selmer Pedro didn't happen. We'll touch on that in a minute. But this is the 31st contracted City player. And looking at Marcanic in particular, there's a lot of interesting things that he can bring to the group. And it all starts back to what his time with the Rapids and what he did with the Rapids, where he recorded 17 matches across all competitions, spending a lot of time with their next pro side, Rapids 2, who I think it should be noted are having a vastly different season than the Rapids. And your playing time with a 2 team may just be because there's a log jam with the first team. I think looking at an Isak Jensen is a good example of that specific scenario. And Marcanic particularly has had a good season at the left back role with Rapids 2, helping them to this first place position so far throughout this year. He's had 19 matches so far with Rapids 2, but he's also kind of an attacking presence. So Nick Marcanic is his twin brother who has that attacking propensity with FC Cincinnati. And while he was with college, in his college at Northern Illinois, Marcanic was a 3-time first team All MAC honoree, making 67 appearances for the Huskies, registering 17 goals and 24 assists. The latter of those are tied for second most in their program's history. So this is a guy who has a history of moving up and down the field very well. He's the guy you can foresee being an attacking threat on the left side that Carnell likes to utilize. And the quote from Lutz Pfannenstiel is, "We are pleased to bring Anthony back to the Midwest. He's a hard worker and an aggressive left back who will bolster our depth at the back line. We are excited to see Anthony continue to develop as a professional with us." That's the thing, Santi, is
Develop.
develop, bolster our depth. That's exactly, I think, where we can look to Marcanic making an impact or how he's going to slot in the back half of the year. What do you think about this signing?
I like just looking at his stats, what he did in college, just that great output of goals and assists, just brings a lot of promise. And yeah, he's still young, and there are a lot of guys right now at that left back position. So I think the team will have time to develop him. I wouldn't be surprised if he spends some time with CITY2. Maybe we'll see him this Sunday with CITY2. Not sure if it is too soon, but I think he will spend a good amount of time with CITY2, playing some minutes there. But at the same time, makes me think about, and I know we're gonna go into guys that will be free agents at the end of the season. But I think this is also in preparation for some of the guys at that position being free agents at the end of the season.
Yeah, while it's not a flashy pick and it doesn't move the needle meaningfully, I think in our starting 11 or our best 11 that we see right now, it definitely aligns with not bringing somebody in that does the trick for a few weeks, the sustainable push for the future, looking at how you're managing this roster for years to come and the pieces that you're going to have available and what your long-term outlook is. Bringing in a Marcanic is a very low risk, high potential reward scenario where we only acquired him for $75,000 in 2023 GAM. Our first round super draft pick in 24 was sent over to Colorado, and a potential conditional $75,000 in 2024 GAM also if those some incentives are met. Typically, when you see these kinds of moves, Santi, I believe the incentives refer to appearances.
Yeah,
Sometimes they might be goals, assists, contributions, those kinds of things. But appearances is the biggest one. And it's where we've made other deals like that with Charlotte, namely for the first round pick last year.
yeah,
And their pick, I don't think is going to qualify for those kinds of incentives. Diop on their back line.
right.
With Marcanic, I think it's the same scenario. We'll see if he meets those. The unfortunate thing is with these kinds of trades, it's rarely, if ever, circled back to on have they fulfilled or met these conditional incentives. So
Right.
I try to look at it as if it's appearance based, and then it's almost hit or miss. Like Sam Adeniran had some conditional incentives for Seattle. I just view him as having met those, given his number of appearances so
Yeah,
far. I
yeah,
think it's one of those where you're never going to have the full answer, so you might as well make an educated guess.
yeah, yeah. And if they don't hit that, it's money that doesn't go out. But Matt, I
Yeah.
have a question on his contract situation. Basically, he comes with what he had in Colorado,
Yeah.
meaning that it's just the options at the moment, right?
Yep. Yeah, so we have him to the end of the year. We can trigger the option for next year. That's usually the understanding with these kinds of deals when they come internally from MLS.
Okay, so yeah, we'll see more from Marcanic in with City 2. We'll see
Likely, yeah.
if he makes any appearances with City. But no, I like the fact that he's young and that could be a weapon on offense long term.
Yeah, we had a reported deal that fell through for another targeted left back. Manuel Veth, our friend from Transfermarkt, reported that there was interest in acquiring a player from Europe who was reportedly not Conrado. So another unnamed player that apparently Lutz had been in contact with, but never came to fruition. Never was publicized on the name, and so we know there was other discussions being had. Nothing came on the left back side. You mentioned it, Santi. We now have what I would consider four left backs on our roster of 30 players. And that's a pretty sizable focus to that position. But I think more than anything, it kind of speaks to the fact that that position has not worked out very well in what they had hoped for, as the starting left back for City is a converted center back. And so there is going to be, I think, an evaluation of this position in particular at the end of the year, because Selmer Pedro did not get loaned out. We hope to see more time with him at City 2. Nothing came to fruition. I think, Santi, did you want to talk about what you've heard as far as maybe some of the things that City was looking for with Pedro that may or may not have impacted his ability to be loaned out?
Yeah, yeah. So what I know is that the team and his agent were looking for a loan to another team. I What I know is that a few weeks ago, like there was a big interest and it was close to happening, but at the end it didn't materialize. So Pedro is still here. When the team announced Marcanic, I thought that maybe there was going to be an announcement about the loan um, after the window closed, but nothing was announced. He's still here, so I think he will continue having appearances for City 2, and it's just now a four-man battle for that starting spot. So hopefully he can show good things with City 2 and make a case to get more minutes with City. It's gotta be a very difficult situation for Pedro, like not having a lot of time with City, and yeah, he has had some minutes with with City 2, but I don't think that was what he expected when he came to St. Louis.
No, and you can make some educated guesses on why the loan didn't materialize. Things that we used with Sam Adeniran loan that were very valuable for that, with where you're not looking to sell the player, you're looking for an ability to recall him whenever you need to. And so if a team wasn't willing to accept some of those potential requirements, that could make it a little more difficult for it to occur. And that's for the betterment of both the club and the player. Like Pedro's a player who they clearly see as wanting to develop and wanting to be a part of their plans long term. There's no, I haven't heard any conversation of saying he's a failed project, a lost cause, anything like that. Not nowhere near that. And so when you loan a player out, is with the express purpose of developing, getting minutes, finding form, and then bringing them back into the fold so that they can play a meaningful part in your team going forward. If that wasn't able to be organized or worked out with any other club, that's unfortunate. And now you look to how the time is going to be split between the first team, where so far it's been Hebert and Nelson. And on the second team with City 2, it's been Pedro here lately, but how's Marcanic going to fit into this? And how is he going to eat into Pedro's time? Is he going to eat into Nelson's time on the first team? And then how does that cascade effect start to occur to find players minutes? Who becomes the odd man or men out? And where do we look going forward? Because now, like I said, all 30 roster slots are full, technically 31 because Schneider is contracted to City and still on loan. So I look to what we have at the end of this year and trying to forecast how these players and more may start to fit into plans at the end of this year. When I look to City contracts that are expiring at the end of this year, looking at contracts and not necessarily team options to pick them up, because this means that the team does have a choice. I look at Jared Stroud, Celio Pompeu, John Nelson, Josh Yarrow, Akil Watts, John Bell, Lucas Bartlett, AZ Jackson, Michael Creek, and Max Schneider as all having, and now Anthony Marcanic, as having contracts that could end at the end of this year, depending on what the team's plans are for them in the future. Some of these players have been extremely valuable to City at various points throughout the year. Jared Stroud, Celio Pompeu, AZ Jackson, Josh Yarrow, Akil Watts, even recently John Bell. Earlier this year, we've had John Nelson, Lucas Bartlett throughout. Like every single one of these players have had their moments, but how do they fit into City's long-term plans, especially because when you look at the depth chart, you have certain things that bubble up, like the left back position where you're having four deep. And looking at any one of our formations, I see a pretty evenly spread distribution across all of our really positions, all of our lines. So I've looked at three different formations as far as how our roster has been run out on the field: the 4-2-3-1, the 4-4-2, and the 3-5-2, really, where you have wingbacks. Any one of those scenarios really has two or three deep at every single position. And so earlier in the year, we talked about depth at any one position. I look at the entire roster as now we know what we're going to have the rest of the year. We're deep in every position. The argument or the conversation now is quality of those positions, and how do you have the depth of quality? Because that's where an expansion team often fails or often falters, is depth, is quality in your depth. We have in any given formation 12 defenders deep, 11 midfielders, 4 forwards, more or less depending on if you swap it out from the 4-2-3-1 on. There's depth here, Santi, but it's, can these conversations that we just had at left back, which can be discussed at any other position on the field, really, can we materialize a player who can carry us forward and be confident in one or two players deep throughout the end of the season?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with all these guys. It's a long list. On some of this, there are options that the team can exercise, right?
Most players here do have options. So it could be that every single player I listed returns next year because City exercises their team option, but it could just as easily be the exact opposite. More than likely, it'll be a mix and match. I can see some players like, I doubt we get rid of AZ Jackson. I doubt the way he's been playing Celio Pompeu with as young as he is. I think some of these players are going to be depth conversations. Akil Watts has
Yeah.
really shown. So earlier in the season, I put less of a stock into that. It's how have they developed with City? How have they come on and really adapted to the system? So the players that you see carry forward, the better they do, the more likely it is we pick up their option, especially the younger, more cost effective ones, I would say. And so from that, you do look to a Jared Stroud, a Saley Pompeo, and AZ Jackson, players who you can pick up an option for as opposed to having to restructure their contracts or re-sign them because they're more like restricted free agents.
Right. Right, but yeah, I agree with you. I think it would be mix and match situation. I don't think everybody on this list will be here in 2024, but still have some time
Mm-hmm.
to think about that, and these guys will have opportunities to continue showing their value. So still a few months away from making those decisions, but to me, it will definitely be a mix and match.
All right, Santi. I think that's everything we have about the specific roster we have now, the transfer window. You want to get a little nerdy?
Hey, did we say anything about the third transaction that happened? I think we forgot
I, I
about.
think I mentioned it. I think I mentioned it, but maybe I didn't give it enough credit because that I mean the last announcement, you have to focus on what the last announcement was under the radar.
Yeah, but yeah, what I wanted to ask. Obviously, we got 100,000 in GAM.
Yeah.
Isn't is that too low for you, or knowing that it is a slot that is not going to be used and that is the end of the transfer window? Maybe that's what it's valued at.
You can look at it. I look at it one particular way. We had 3 trades before the season, acquiring 3 international slots. 2 of those trades were we paid $100,000 for, $100,000 in GAM for, and then we were able to flip it for the exact amount. So I look at it as if we made a good or bad deal before, we made the exact same deal now. Inflation's a thing, so the price didn't go up for us. We didn't lose money, and at the same time, we were kind of a desperate team because if you don't trade it at this point, it's just a gone slot. You don't get any money for it. And I think we were able to parlay that to Atlanta, who did need an international slot for some of the moves that they made. So it was just a beneficial deal that I think Atlanta was willing to pay the market value we paid for. I doubt we were trying to hold them hostage in any kind of
Right.
exorbitant amount. So I'm happy with it because at the end of the day, it's just a wash on what we had paid for it originally.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So at least recoup what
Yeah,
you paid for it. And hey, it's just an additional 100,000 you can use next year.
that's right. That's right. And these roster slots, these international roster slots, like we paid $100,000 to offload a 2023 international roster slot. The GAM that we got in that is 2024 GAM. So if you want to get really, really, really into the weeds on this, you can look at it as it's not money for this year, but it's money for next year. And the overarching thing to me is that GAM doesn't expire. So any
Right.
trade, any kind of discussion about general allocation money that's available to us, we get it in buckets per year, and I'll go over the amounts in a moment, but we never have it expire. Targeted allocation money does expire after 4 transfer windows. So you get it, a bucket of it at the beginning of the season, and then after 4 transfer windows, what you had initially expires. And so you have to spend it wisely. And that's why GAM is more valuable in general and has far more uses and less restrictions than TAM because it doesn't expire. That's why all these trades are with GAM. GAM can be traded, TAM cannot be traded. You can only use TAM on certain scenarios like buying down a player who makes over the max salary. You can use it on some homegrown signings, but it's very limited in its use. GAM is much more wide open, and so next year we have $100,000 more of it.
And when you say it's good for 4 transfer windows, that basically means it's good for 2 years.
2 years.
Okay.
Yeah. You ready to
All
get
right. So
you
let's
ready to
get
get a
nerdy.
little? Yeah, let's do
Yeah.
it. Okay. So we talked about the players on the roster, the depth that we have now. Let's talk about what we have available and kind of the roster slots that we can look forward to because that's been a kind of a point of conversation and contention in some circles is why hasn't St. Louis made use of some of these roster slots? What do we even have? What do they mean? We did a show MLS 201 back last fall. So if you're listening to this and you're wanting a lot more information about all the specific MLS roster rules, go back through our feed to last fall around the expansion draft time. Check out MLS 201. It's a deep dive that we did on every single roster rule. So we're really only going to look at what we have and what we have available right now, which is having an entire roster full of players now. So we have no available roster slots for St. Louis City as we stand on beginning of August 2023. We have two known designated players on our team, Joao Klaus and Edu Leuven. Every MLS team is allowed up to 3 designated players. If you slot 2 designated players as senior DPs, meaning they're over the age of 23, you have an opportunity to sign a young designated player as your third DP slot. If that third DP is either signed as a young DP, meaning they're less than 23, or not signed at all and you only have 2 DPs, then you unlock 3 U22 initiative slots, meaning 3 of your roster slots you can sign players under the age of 22 for an unlimited amount, and they only hit your salary budget at 150,000 or 200,000 depending on their age. It's an extremely valuable, cost-effective means to sign young, talented players and fit them into the overall salary cap structure that exists. It's highly valuable if you are scouting and if you target players of that age. Plus, it allows you the affordability of developing them and selling them on for ideally a much more higher price than what they're costing you. But with St. Louis City right now, we have 2 known designated players, Edu Leuven, Joao Klaus. They haven't announced any other DP, and we don't have a young DP signed. We don't have any named U22 players signed. We have 2 homegrown players signed, Caden Glover and Miguel Perez. And homegrown players are basically those who have just gone through your academy for a year, or there's other kind of broader restrictions, like they're from your area that you have on a list, but essentially that they're from your area, you've helped develop them, and you sign them to their first pro contract. That's Glover and Perez right now for St. Louis. In addition, every single year, each MLS team is given 8 international roster slots. And so we have 10 international players on our roster right now. You can acquire other international roster slots. So that third trade we made this window, offloading an international slot to Atlanta for GAM, we made 3 of those ourselves before the season to scoop up, gain flexibility. It allowed us to sign Nukvi Torison. Like, that's why, because we had that additional international slot. So we have 10 international players. We have no available international slots. And that's where our roster stands so far, with the 2 DPs, the no young DP, the no third DP, the no U22s, 2 homegrowns, 10 international players.
So
This is where, yeah, go for it, because I know what you're going to ask.
next year we're back to ADPs, right?
International players.
Yeah, sorry, not DPs. 8
Yes,
international
it
roster
resets.
slots.
It 99% of the time it resets. It is theoretically possible for you to work with a team to acquire multiple years worth of international slots, but it doesn't happen. I mean,
Right.
practically it doesn't happen. So next year we will be back down to 8 international roster slots, and we'll need to look at, can we get some of our existing players green cards, or do we need to trade for additional international slots to make them compliant with the roster rules? And that's where it gets a little interesting, because we've had some of these players for almost a year and a half at this point, namely Max Schneider, who is under contract with City. If he were to come back from loan, would take up an international slot, which we don't have available. So we're not going to be able to recall him from loan this year. And that's the kind of player who arrived to City first with CITY2 and is an international player. So I would expect that if we were going to bring him back, we would get him we're working to get him a green card. And we asked a few weeks ago when Lutz was there if he had a green card, and the answer was no, not yet. So no, as far as we know, none of the players who arrived last year with CITY2 have green cards. But because most of those players are on multi-year contracts, especially the bigger ones, Berkey, Klaus, Leuven, Jensen, Thomas Ostrak, Rasmus Alm, Joachim Nilsson, all those players are on longer term contracts. You would hope that at some point soon, they're the ones being targeted for green cards, so they don't take up these valuable international slots.
Yeah, I will think by the end of the season or before next season starts, we will see some news on some of these players.
I'm absolutely looking to hear more news in the offseason. That's going to be a big story to follow, because that's going to have a big impact in who we can sign once we do have available players or available slots to fill in the offseason, rather. But looking at the roster, one last thing I do want to say on our makeup as far as these individual designations is, on the MLSsoccer.com website, they list Isak Jensen as a young designated player. We've heard rumors that Roman Berkey is technically classified as a designated player as far as MLS bookkeeping is concerned. And in all honesty, it's all moving the puzzle pieces of the MLS monopoly money around. It is there are scenarios. Like I'll give this specific scenario because I think it is the most likely as to what happened. Is Roman Berkey is making what we call the max TAM amount of money. He's making just under $1.65 million per year. That's his salary. He came to us on a free transfer, so he doesn't have a transfer fee baked into that. MLS rules say that for you to be a designated player, you need to be making more salary plus your transfer fee of over 1.65 million. Otherwise, you have the ability to be bought down from a DP status. Buying down just means in the MLS like ecosystem, you're going from being classified as a DP to a non-DP. And if you're making 1.65 million or less per year on your salary budget charge, you can be bought down. The team can classify you as whatever they want to if you're making over 651,000. That's just they can choose to classify a designated player as a player making $800,000 a year. But they don't have to. They can buy you down with TAM. And that's how you're not considered a DP if you're making over $651,000. That's Berkey to a T. Berkey is a max TAM player, but for MLS bookkeeping purposes, they could classify him as a DP and pay a penalty to MLS of $150,000 for having 3 senior DPs. So suddenly he's a DP, all we've paid is $150,000 and we move on. The alternative is we have to pay at least $1 million of TAM to buy him down to under that max salary charge. That's a lot of TAM to spend up when you could just as easily say, all right, we're going to consider him a third DP, even though like he doesn't need to be, and we're going to save all of this TAM. So that I think that is just as likely to have happened on the bookkeeping side than not calling Berkey a DP and saying he's max TAM. Like it's all how you really classify somebody on paper, but in what's possible and theoretically in MLS, like it doesn't matter from that perspective. And the only reason why we're having this come out in conversation today, as we record this on Friday, August 4th, is because a story came out that the Columbus Crew, in their attempts to keep Lucas Zelarayan and sign with Diego Rossi, I believe,
Yep.
they had conversations about trying to buy down Darlington Nagbe, who is a designated player for them, making $1.8 million. 1.8 is not even, I mean, it's 150,000 more. It's not even like, okay, this is a dollar or two. This is $150,000 more than the rules legitimately say can happen. And so they didn't let him buy Nagbe down because it wasn't 1.65 million. It was 1.8. It was significantly more. Like that's why it matters, not anything else necessarily. And the last thing I'll say on that, Santi, is these numbers may seem arbitrary, 1.65, but all it is $1 million in TAM more than the
Right.
max salary budget charge. And the max salary budget charge has gone up every year along with the CBA. So as the CBA grows and as time goes on, players can be paid more. That's just how leagues work. And so it's always been $1 million more than the max budget charge is what a player can be bought down at. And that's going to continue. So next year it won't be 1.65. It'll be like it might be 1.8.
Maybe I will change it to 1.8 so Columbus can buy down Darlington
Yeah.
Nagbe.
Yeah, but that's it's not some random 1.65. It's just $1 million over the max budget charge that they let you buy down a player with TAM. So Berkey classifies into that. Whether he's classified as a DP or not, it's almost irrelevant outside of if you're trying to get into the nitty-gritty of trying to figure out how much GAM and TAM and salary space St. Louis has actually spent and left over, which I kind of have tried to do that. And so using that logic, trying to get some kind of idea of how much GAM and TAM and salary space do we have right now with everything we just discussed, I came up with a number of available GAM and TAM right now after the transfer window of around $965,000. And by that, I used the logic of Berkey's classified as a third DP. So
Okay.
we didn't spend $1 million of TAM on him. What we did, our biggest single spend so far of GAM and TAM, are buying down of players whose combined transfer and salary exceed that max. Looking at Selmer Pedro, Tomas Ostrak, Joachim Nilsson, and Nuke Vitorisson. Those players, when you combine their transfer fees and how much they're making salary reported by the MLSPA, is more than $651,250, the max budget charge. You've also had trades this year to acquire players like Tim Parker, Jared Stroud, Sam Adeniran, AZ Jackson, Ben Lunt, and then general buying down of players' salaries to fit into a $5.2 million salary cap. So all of those things combined is where we're spending a vast majority, if not all, of our GAM and TAM. That fits us into what I've had about $1,000 free in our salary cap. So we're basically at the salary cap
A
5.2 limit.
$1,000.
That's the math I was able to work out. Now, none of it's specific because I don't know how much we're spending on any individual player. This is
Yeah.
all like taking Pedro's contract and saying, okay, we're spending 300,000 of TAM to buy out his transfer fee, and then we're applying another 150,000 in GAM to buy down his salary charge, because the salary charge has to fit into the 5.2 million. That's where it all boils down to. These MLS mechanisms, all these GAM, TAM, DPs, it's all about what a player's salary charge is on the books needing to fit into that 5.2.
Wow, that's a lot of assumptions you have to make to get to that number. It's
It is.
to me, it's too bad that there is no transparency in the league about these numbers and who has what status. It would be great if that information was made public and people knew what every team had available and how they start the year and what the different moves they make during the year impact that. But that's just a dream.
It's definitely a dream, and there's a specific verbiage in the roster rules that say outside of those trades, the amount of GAM and TAM spent by a team is confidential to protect league, player, and negotiations. So they protect themselves by not disclosing it. But it would, I keep beating that drum that I don't like the amount of specifics and all these like very requirements that they have in MLS, as far as you can spend three DPs, but the way that you construct the rest of your roster is very limited. And the transparency around that, it sucks for a fan. Like, it is difficult because the amount of hoops that I had to jump through on these Excel spreadsheets, I I I don't know why I do it, but I can never say anybody should do it, because it's just, and at the end of the day, none of it's exactly accurate. It's all ballpark.
Right.
Like, you're all just trying to figure out how can they take and the only known information we have are the MLSPA salaries, the reported transfer fees, and the announced trades and deals that the club makes themselves. Like, they announce that they've sent out or received GAM, or so we only have the information that is publicly available, that we don't have anything beyond that. And so the guiding light in what I try to do is assuming that you want to get as close to zero at the end of the day for your salary cap as possible. And in order to do that, you spend the least amount of GAM, you spend the least amount of TAM, because that can be carried over. And the way that those work throughout the year, I mentioned the CBA plays a direct impact in this. For perspective, the salary budget charges have grown over the past few years, but will continue to grow. So the current CBA was renegotiated back during COVID and will go until 2027. So right now, the CBA's salary budget chart, or the total salary, 5.21 million. The general allocation money every team receives right now is 1.9 million. The TAM that everyone receives each year is 2.72, and that equals an available roster spend in 2023 of 9.83 million. That's what every team has to spend. DPs are how you go above that. U22s are how you go above that. And that's where you get Toronto, you get Miami spending all of this money on a few players, and their total roster ends up being like 25, 30, $50 million, because their DPs are making way beyond this because they don't count towards anything I just listed. Over the next few years, that's going to start to grow a little bit, but incrementally. People talk about wanting to see rule changes, wanting to see an overhaul of the roster rules. The next few years, the salary budget is going to go up to 5.4, 5.9, 6.4, and $7 million for the next few years. The corresponding GAM and TAMs that will rise with that are leading to available roster spends of all of that of next year, 10.4 million, then 11.1, 11.8, and 13 million. So by the time the CBA ends, the roster will have only gone up and available $4 million to spend outside of these three DP slots and the three U22 slots. That's why overhauls to the entire roster structure are so badly desired, seeing that teams want to be able to have more freedom and flexibility in how they spend their money.
So, in theory, if the league wanted to change these rules to increase the budget, will they have to renegotiate the CBA, or how does that work?
I assume so because all these incremental rises were negotiated as part of that, and that's why I'm pessimistic. I'm never pessimistic, but I'm pessimistic on that actually happening unless the owners push for it and get the players buy-in for it. I've seen Alejandro
That,
Bedoya
yeah.
have viable options in how to do this. So I don't doubt that the players would be on board with this. And with more owners pushing for it, I can see a coordinated effort being negotiated that they can overhaul or take the available amount of money and say, okay, instead of having this $11 million, or instead of having this $10 million be this total available and Gam and Tam is a part of this and yada, yada, yada. Let's just say, screw the salary budget, screw the allocation money. We're going to start at a baseline of this tens of millions of dollars. Maybe it's like a $25 million, and then you can spend that however you want throughout your roster. Ready, set, go.
Hmm.
With Messi, everything's starting to change, honestly. Like there's a lot of conversations about how Miami was able to sign him and if it's unfair to other teams, but the way that this last board of governors meeting at the All-Star game went and the quotes that we had coming out of that from Jorge Mas and from others really does seem like the tides are shifting to more openness and willingness to open up the way that rosters are constructed and the flexibility that teams have.
Yeah, I had not thought about the CBA, about being one more
Yep.
wrinkle you have to worry about if you're gonna change the rules. But yeah, definitely Miami bringing Messi and Jordi Alba and Sergio Busquets. I think that's going to result in changes at some point for the league. And it's funny when we were talking about all the budget charges and the lack of transparency. Obviously, Miami has generated a lot of conversation, and people think that they are getting a special treatment, but in theory, they are doing everything by the rules, right?
That's the thing. They are. And the only conversations about Miami is how did they get Rodolfo Pizarro to agree to a buyout on his contract? It's those kinds of things. Is how did they convince the player to do this? Like that's where how did they convince Jordi Alba to come here on a max TAM deal? The same way that Gareth Bale came on a max TAM deal. The same way Roman Berkey came on a max
Yeah.
TAM deal. Like those are the questions people have is how did they convince the player? Because all of these the ways that the players are classified now, Messi and Busquets as designated players. I think it's Campana might be the young DP.
Yep. Yep.
And then they have three U22 slots because two senior DPs, one young DP, three U22s. And they're signing those U22s for big
Right.
contracts. And then they have Jordi Alba as coming in as a max TAM player. So Alba fits in without using the DP model. So everything that they've been able to construct fits into the roster rules. It's the things beyond that. Like people are upset and having comments about Messi's specific deal that has Apple TV and Adidas involved. I view Messi as the entire outlier of this entire equation, where he's the exception, not the rule. And if you're going to start talking about the greatest of all time to ever play the game in the same conversations as other teams' $2 million transfer fee player that is a DP, like those are apples to oranges. And this is a
Yeah.
once in a lifetime generational type player that they made special dispensations to bring him to the league. And it just so happens that Miami is the beneficiary of that. It's one player that can play for one team, but he's the greatest of all time, getting all of these eyes, visibility into the league. The onus is now on the league and the owners to use that momentum to make these kinds of roster changes, to grow the league in a way that can be sustainable and growth driven after Messi leaves. That's the key to making this whole thing successful for the league and for every team involved long after Messi leaves.
Yeah, because he'll be here 2.5 years.
Yep.
So that will mean those changes will have to be made soon. But yeah, I hope the league uses it to bring. Obviously, there is only one Messi, but if you can bring more players of that caliber by adjusting the rules, I think long term it will benefit not only Miami but every team and the league.
That's the key. Anything else you want to look at for the roster, or have I gone long enough into my passionate conversation there?
No, no, I think we're good on the roster. Just wanted to take a quick moment. A couple of people left us comment on the chat on the live
Hmm.
stream, so just wanted to acknowledge them. Our friend Mo, he's saying that he finally made another live show, and also
Yeah.
Jason Goodbody, he also said that he is delayed on the broadcast, but is looking forward to listening once we post it.
Appreciate that, guys. It's a Friday afternoon that we're recording this, so I have no idea who's going to be available and who might tune in. So it's awesome that people are watching this. Really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks for being on this ride with us as we're going through our own withdrawals from no city to watch, no city to hear about with training, and having to watch all these other teams go about their business. It's tough at times, but hopefully we'll get through it here soon. But hey, we do have a team to watch this weekend, right? We have City 2. City 2 is a team that we haven't really talked about much lately, other than the occasional who from City is going to start. So I want to do a little level setting as we wrap up this show with a look at City 2. City 2 won the Western Conference last year with a totally different look and feel and priorities. This year, City 2 has very much been a developmental year. A lot of City players have gone up and down. You've had some disparities in the lineups because of the different priorities that the organization had that City 2 has been kind of along the ride for. But as they stand now, City 2 is 5-8-7 in MLS Next Pro. They have 20 points, sitting in ninth place in the West, and the top 7 teams go to the playoffs. So they're just outside of the playoff picture for MLS Next Pro, who redid their playoff structure this year. They opened it up a little bit more. So these next few games are going to be very meaningful with 8 matches to go for City 2 until their season's over. Very meaningful to how they can continue playing into the playoffs. They've played 20 games, and I mentioned the different priorities. There have only been 5 players through 20 games that have 15 or more starts. Michael Wenzel has started all 20. He's a center back. He comes from Borussia Mönchengladbach's academy system. He was captain there. He's captained City 2 all year. Johnny Klein has started 17 of the 20 games for City 2. He's played with City. He's had probably the most exposure of any City 2 player as far as visibility, fandom, and just everybody cheering for him, because who doesn't love the homegrown story? Max Schneider, we mentioned him a lot earlier, has started 16 of the 20 games. Faisal Batash and Juan Kuzain have both started 15 games. Batash up front and Kuzain is the midfielder in the attacking mid. So those are the only players. Just those 5 players have 15 or more starts. Everybody else has been kind of moving up and down. You have your Pedros, your Jensens, your Akil Wattses. You have Sergio Rivas. You have, there's a host of players from City 2, both from the academy on up. Josh Mayer's seen some time. You've had a lot. Caden Glover has seen a lot of time, especially recently. This has been a very growth-driven team. But Santi, the one player who I started the year pretty interested in, wondering how he would develop under City 2, and I've had a lot of questions, and we've had some questions asked of us about this guy too, is what's up with Owen O'Malley? Owen O'Malley has not started since May 28th for City 2, and he hasn't played at all in the last 2 games. Owen O'Malley was St. Louis's first round, 9th overall super draft pick this past year, signed to a Generation Adidas contract, and he has been up or down, hit or miss, kind of epitomizing a lot of the overall City 2 flavor. He's had some nuggets of information as far as um, discipline, as far as cohesion in the system. But other than those rumors or thoughts or kind of paragraphs and stories, there hasn't been a whole lot of information that we've really been able to glean about Owen O'Malley and his trajectory going forward.
Yeah, not a lot of information available, but yeah, just the fact that he was suspended for some time just because of violation of team policies. Of obviously, not a lot of information available on that too, and the fact that he hasn't featured for City 2 in a while, it just says like I don't know what it means, but it's just too bad that things haven't gone that well for him and for the team. I'm sure City had a lot of hope on him and for him, and putting him on the City 2 system to start the season. I'm sure that was part of the plan. And he had some weeks where he trained with the first team, but that hasn't happened in a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully he can turn the ship, and whatever he has going on, he can get past that, and start showing that he's a valuable player for the team. Hopefully, he will get another chance for next season or for later in this season.
And I guess the good thing for the overall system with City 2 is that is probably our only question mark and only concern, I think, throughout this entire roster. Everything else has been pretty as we've expected, as far as some of the City players getting time with City 2, like Max Schneider, obviously, but Selmer Pedro, Michael Creek, Isak Jensen, Caden Glover seeing a lot of time there. And seeing the development of some of the players specifically signed to City 2 and from our academy and our U21 side in the UPSL. So having Faisal Batashi, having Michael Wenzel, those guys from Queens Park Rangers and Borussia Mönchengladbach's academy in particular, I think those two, and I said this last week and I'll said it before, those are two of my big players to watch as far as impacts to City in the future. I think some of these players, especially that we saw last week in their 4-2 win over LAFC, where there was a goal fest and we saw the return of Joachim Nilsson. We hope to see that going forward. But I think some of those players, Joachim Nilsson, obviously, but also Selmer Pedro, Max Schneider, Isak Jensen, Caden Glover, John Klein, Tyson Pierce, who we haven't really talked about, but featured last week, recently had a youth national team appearance. He's a defensive midfielder for us last week. Wenzel and Batashi, all those players, that's the future. Like there's a core that's developing here at City 2 that's exciting to see play together. They're young. They're all 23 or under, I believe. But seeing all those players kind of learn to play together and being able to gel and what that could mean carrying forward to City as we look to roster turnover year over year and what's going to happen as we look to the development of the academy to City 2 to City, even players signed outside of the system to City 2, bringing that forward. That's an interesting wrinkle that we hadn't really discussed at a lot last year, but is something that Wenzel and Batashi are really showing can be a viable option. Sign some of these players who are either outcasts or they didn't work out in their development systems in Europe and bring them over. That's the power of the Lutz Pfannenstiel scouting system and the scouting network. That's kind of the guys. Those are the guys I'm looking forward to in this next match against the Real Monarchs and also going forward. What do you think of those guys or the roster that we've put together with City 2?
I think it's a good roster, and it has a mix of players from the academy, players that, as you said, maybe didn't um, they didn't fulfill expectations in their respective academies or teams, but Lutz found a role for them here with City 2, and yeah, some of them we could be looking at them playing for City. The only thing, as we were talking about the roster having 30 players and some players having contracts through the end of the year, it's gonna be and it's gonna be a great problem to have for Bradley and Lutz when they look at the roster for 2024 and they have to make decisions. And when we were saying there will be a mix and match with the players that have contracts to the end of the year, is because you also have some of these players knocking on the door and showing that they could be valuable for the system. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Wenzel and maybe Betachi move to City next year, or at least one of them.
Yeah.
But when you do that, you have to make decisions on some of the current roster too.
There's always somebody knocking on the door. There's always somebody waiting to take somebody else's position in this system. We've seen that all year long. But what we're about to see is City 2 facing the Real Monarchs at home this Sunday. City 2 recently snapped their 4-match winless streak, like I said, with a 4-2 win over LAFC this next Sunday in front of what very well could be a Next Pro attendance record, where as of August 1st, we heard that there were over 7,000 tickets sold. It definitely would be an all-time City 2 attendance record, breaking the Herman Stadium attendance record last year. I believe that was 6,800.
Yeah.
And we hope to see more. We hope to see that. It's youth soccer night with over 38 clubs doing a pre-match procession at the pitch. The Monarchs are currently 12th in the MLS Next Pro West with just 21 points. They have a 6-11-2 record, but strangely, they're better away than they are at home. So this could be a very nice matchup to see. And it will hopefully keep the momentum going from last week, where we saw the return of Joachim Nilsson. We saw a high octane offense with Caden Glover getting a brace, Johnny Klein with an amazing goal from Isak Jensen. These are the kinds of partnerships and passing networks and all of the things that play into it that we hope to see again this week that we saw last week develop with these players in this window of time where eyes can be on City 2. There's no City match, and you're able to just get the fan support around these players. It's a unique time that I don't think any of us really expected, or I mean, maybe even wanted to see given City's performance. But this is an interesting opportunity, and I do hope to see the entire East Bowl of City Park packed with fans. It's an exciting team to come and watch.
Yeah, yeah. I've been to a couple of games, and it's always exciting to see the CITY2 players, combination with some of the City guys who don't get a lot of minutes. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this game. Obviously, there is nothing else going on, no City games to go to, or a lot of times people, the excuse is, oh, but I was at City last night, and back to
Yep.
back days of soccer is too much. But there is nothing around it. So great opportunity to come out and support the guys at CITY2. There's going to be a great turnout. I know that there will be some supporters there also. There will be some
Santos.
drums. Santos will be there. So yeah, if you haven't had the stadium experience, this is a great opportunity to have a similar type of experience because obviously 7,000 a few days ago, but I would think that by now that's probably in the 9,000, 10,000 range. So a great opportunity to check the stadium. Tickets are only $13, and
Mhm.
to get the experience and also to support this team. Some of the guys that in a few years we will see them wearing the city uniform.
That's right. And hopefully in a few weeks, we'll see Joachim Nilsson wear it. Come out, get a first glimpse at him, get a first glimpse at some of the players that we're going to see in a few years. Like you said, it's a good family friendly environment. It's a lot more laid back than city matches, but the support and the fervor is still there. Like I think there's chants that happen. There'll be drums. This will be a little more of a flair of an experience than some other City 2 matches. It'll be a nice, exciting time, and it'll get us through this gap that we have until August 20th when City returns. Santi,
Can't
anything
wait.
else?
No, no. Yeah, just get your soccer fix this weekend with CITY2. But I think that's a lot of information. And Matt, we didn't accomplish the 30-minute podcast again.
We never do. We never do. I always see hope at the end of the tunnel on we can do this. There's not a whole lot to talk about, but there always are things to talk about. I love it, you love it, and hopefully you love it too if you're listening with us and you've stuck with us for this hour. Thank you so much for sticking around with us. My name is Matt Baker, Santiago Beltran. We're Flyover Footy. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do for whenever new episodes drop. We'll probably bring another one to you next week. Well, we will bring another one to you next week, just one more during this break. We're going to preview the last 11 games of the season next week. So I've already given a little thought to what we can do in this break. We're going to have a preview of the last half of the season. We're going to look at what kind of finish does City need to make the playoffs, to secure home field, to earn a CONCACAF Champions Cup berth, all of these potentialities, as well as looking around what's going on in the league, League's Cup. And of course, any news that happens in the next week for City, we will bring it to you. Thank you as always. We appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you later.
Vamos, City.